The world looks different when you're 8, when every shadow can hide a secret, every alley can whisper danger. Grace stepped lightly on the cracked sidewalks, backpack bouncing, eyes darting from one darkened corner to another. The evening air was cool, but there was a tension that made her shoulders tense. Something told her she wasn't alone. Kaiser padded silently beside her, his paws whispering against the concrete. To anyone else, he might have looked calm, composed, the perfect picture of obedience. But his eyes, golden and unyielding, scanned the streets for threats his small companion couldn't see. He sensed a danger looming, the kind that no adult could predict, the kind that turns a quiet suburban evening into a test of instinct and courage. A motorcycle's roar shattered the night, throwing echoes into the alleyways. Grace's heartbeat spiked. She looked to Kaiser. The dog's ears twitched, his body a silent promise. "I've got you." It was a promise that would be tested in ways neither could yet imagine. A journey through fear, determination, and the unbreakable bond between a girl and her protector. The schoolyard at noon was alive with its usual symphony. The squeak of swings, the slap of jump ropes on concrete, the uneven laughter of children carried by the spring breeze. Yet just beyond the heart of all that noise, there stood the old oak tree. Its roots stretched like tired fingers through the grass, and its branches, broad and stubborn, gave shade to a quiet corner where 2 children had chosen to hide from the chaos. Noah sat cross-legged in the dirt, his knees scuffed from a game of tag earlier that morning. Grace, with her braid slipping loose down her back, sat across from him, her little lunchbox open between them. She unwrapped a piece of hard candy, strawberry-flavored, the kind that melted slowly on the tongue, and handed it to Noah as if it were a treasure too rare to keep for herself. He accepted it with both hands, as if it were something sacred. "We'll always share," he said, his voice barely louder than the rustling leaves above them. Grace nodded earnestly, her eyes wide, almost solemn. With her finger, she traced a heart in the dirt, its outline crooked but full of purpose. Inside it, she wrote their initials, G+N, and covered it quickly with her palm, as if protecting it from being stolen by the wind. "Forever," she whispered. The word hung there, fragile, almost too heavy for a child's lips. Noah mirrored her seriousness. "Forever," he repeated, though he didn't quite know what it meant. To him, forever was just another recess, another afternoon chasing shadows with her. It was candy shared and secret laughter. It was sitting beneath this oak tree where no one else bothered to come, believing the world was small enough to fit between them. Grace leaned closer. "If you ever leave, I'll find you," she said, and there was no trace of play in her voice. "Even if the whole world says no." Noah studied her face, the freckles sprinkled across her cheeks, the way her braid frayed in the wind. Something in him, something wordless and deep, understood that she meant every syllable. He swallowed the candy, sweet and sharp on his tongue, and answered, "And I'll wait, no matter how long." Above them, the oak tree groaned in the breeze, its branches bowing as if to listen. For a while they sat in silence, their small hands finding each other in the grass. Noah's was warm, Grace's trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the strange weight of the promise they were making. Around them, the shouts of other children felt distant, blurred like the background of a photograph. Grace tilted her head. "Do you think grown-ups ever keep promises?" Noah frowned. "Sometimes, but mostly, they forget." She sighed, her lips pressing together. Then we can't tell them ours. They'll just laugh. He nodded. And in that nod was the beginning of a pact. Quiet, unspoken, but binding in its own innocent way. A gust of wind swept the yard, scattering petals from the flowering bushes along the fence. One petal landed in Grace's hair. Noah, shyly, reached to brush it away, his fingers brushing her braid. She smiled, a smile that made the whole yard feel brighter, even though no one else saw it. Somewhere in the distance, the bell tower struck the half-hour. The sound was deep, steady, and reminded them both that recess would end soon. Already the other children were drifting back toward the school building, some still laughing, some squabbling over games unfinished. But Noah and Grace stayed. Grace pressed her palm into the dirt again, uncovering the heart she had drawn. She looked at it for a long moment, then at him. "If it rains, it'll wash away," she said. "Then we'll draw another," Noah replied quickly, his determination outpacing his vocabulary. "We'll draw as many as it takes." For the first time all day, Grace giggled. It was soft, like the sound of a bell muffled under cloth. Noah grinned at her, and for a second, he felt taller, braver, older. Their joy was so small, so ordinary, and yet so absolute. Still, beyond the oak's shade, the world had already begun to tilt against them. From the window of the school building, Grace's mother, who volunteered at the cafeteria, had caught sight of them holding hands. Her mouth tightened, her eyes narrowing. To her, it was not tender, but improper. To her, childhood should remain neat and innocent, untouched by words like love and forever. And at that very same hour, across town, Noah's foster guardians, who barely remembered his birthday, spoke casually about him as though he were just another obligation. If they had seen the crooked heart scratched into the dirt, they might have laughed, or worse, ignored it entirely. But for Noah and Grace, none of that existed yet. There was only this moment. Two small figures under an ancient oak, candy wrappers fluttering at their feet, their hands clasped with a sincerity that outshone their years. "Do you think forever is real?" Grace asked one last time. Noah squeezed her hand. "It is if we say it is." And though they couldn't know it then, though the future would bring storms, shadows, and trials, neither could imagine. The vow whispered beneath that oak tree would follow them, fragile yet unbreakable, into the darkest corners of their lives. The afternoon sun slanted lower, painting long shadows across the schoolyard as the final bell released a flood of children into the waiting arms of parents. The oak tree now stood silent, its shade empty, the crooked heart in the dirt fading under the scuff of hurried shoes. Grace clutched her backpack straps and walked toward the parking lot, where her mother waited near the car. Her mother's eyes found her instantly, and narrowed. Grace had barely taken 3 steps before the sharpness in her mother's voice cut through the fading chatter. "Grace Jensen," she called, her tone edged with authority. "Come here, now." The little girl froze, her stomach knotting. She recognized that tone. It wasn't simply calling her home, it was summoning her for judgment. She walked slowly, head down, braids swaying against her back like a guilty banner. Her mother crouched to eye level the moment she reached her. "What was that I saw?" she demanded, her voice low enough not to draw attention from other parents, but firm enough to press against Grace's small chest like a weight. "Holding hands? Sitting under that tree with a boy?" Grace blinked, her lips trembling. "He's my friend." "Friends don't act like that," her mother snapped. "You're far too young for nonsense like this." Do you understand me?" The girl nodded automatically, though the words scraped like thorns. The promise she and Noah had whispered only hours earlier suddenly felt fragile, under siege. She wanted to tell her mother that it wasn't nonsense, that it was real, at least to her. But her voice caught in her throat, strangled by the knowledge that adults never believed children's truths. Her mother straightened, sighing heavily. "You'll forget about him in a week," she said, brushing imaginary dust from Grace's shoulder, as if to erase the memory of Noah's hand. "Now, let's go home." Grace climbed into the car, pressing her forehead to the cool glass of the window. Outside, Noah stood near the curb, waiting for his ride. Their eyes met briefly, his full of questions, hers brimming with silent apology. Noah's foster guardians arrived late, as they usually did. A dented pickup truck rolled up, coughing smoke. The woman who stepped out wore her exhaustion plainly, a grocery list clutched in one hand, her gaze skimming over Noah with the indifference of someone checking off a chore. "Come on, kid," she called. "Get in." Noah slid into the back seat, hugging his backpack to his chest. The seat smelled faintly of stale fries and detergent, a scent that always reminded him this wasn't home. Just another stop in a line of temporary places. "What's with the long face?" the man in the driver's seat asked gruffly, eyes fixed on the road as they pulled away. Noah hesitated. He wanted to speak, to tell them about the heart in the dirt, about Grace's promise of forever. He wanted to confess that holding her hand had felt like holding on to something real in a world where so much was uncertain. So he said softly, "I like Grace." The woman laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "You're 8. You don't know what you like yet." "It's just play," the man added, shifting gears. "Don't waste your head on silly stuff." Noah stared at the back of the seat, his cheeks burning. To them, it was nothing. To them, his feelings were as fleeting as chalk drawings on the sidewalk, gone with the first rain. They didn't understand that when Grace said, "forever," he had believed her. Believed it more than he had believed any promise adults had ever made to him. The car rattled over a pothole, jolting him. He turned his face toward the window, watching the town blur past. Houses with tidy yards, kids on bikes, the same streets he and Grace sometimes walked after school. And it all felt different now, muted, as though the scolding and laughter of adults had cast a grey veil over everything. In the quiet, Noah whispered to himself, "It's not silly." The words were so faint, the hum of the engine swallowed them whole. That evening, Grace sat at the kitchen table, her untouched plate of meatloaf cooling in front of her. Her father wasn't home yet. Duty often kept him until late, and her mother, busy with chores, had left her alone with her thoughts. She picked at her food, hearing her mother's earlier words echo in her mind. Friends don't act like that. You'll forget about him. Forget, Grace thought. She didn't want to forget. She remembered the way Noah had brushed the petal from her hair, the seriousness in his voice when he said, "forever." Those moments were hers, and no scolding could erase them. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Instead, she slid from her chair and wandered toward the back door. Outside, the evening air was cooler, tinged with the smell of cut grass. She pressed her forehead to the wooden frame and whispered, "I won't forget." Kaiser padded over from his spot near the porch. His dark coat shimmered in the fading light, his eyes steady and watchful. He nudged her knee gently, as if sensing the storm inside her. Grace bent to bury her face against his neck, her small arms wrapped around him. "They don't understand," she murmured into his fur. "But you do, don't you?" The shepherd stood still, enduring her embrace without flinching. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone was enough to remind her that not all promises dissolved under the weight of adult dismissal. Across town, in the cramped bedroom Noah called his own. He lay awake long after the house had gone quiet. The foster couple's voices drifted faintly through the walls, muffled conversations about bills and groceries. None of it about him. He clutched the candy wrapper Grace had given him earlier, smoothed flat under his pillow. The strawberry scent was gone, but the memory lingered. He imagined her handwriting in the dirt, the way her hand had fit into his. "They don't get it," he whispered into the dark. "But we do." His chest tightened with something he didn't yet have words for, a mixture of defiance, longing, and the fragile certainty that their bond mattered. In another house, on another street, Grace whispered the same truth to a shepherd lying at her feet. And though miles of distance and walls of disbelief separated them, both children drifted into uneasy sleep, holding on to the fragile thread of their promise, already feeling the first pull of shadows that would soon test it. Evening settled gently over the small town, stretching long ribbons of amber light across rooftops and yards. The air carried the mingled scents of fresh-cut grass and the faint smoke of barbecues, drifting from neighboring houses. Children's laughter still lingered in the streets, but softer now, fading as front doors closed and porch lights flicked on. At the Jensen house, Grace sat on the back steps, hugging her knees, the day's scolding still echoing in her ears. The weight of her mother's disapproval pressed heavy, like a stone on her chest. She didn't understand how something that felt so pure, sitting under a tree, sharing candy, holding a hand, could be called wrong. Behind the chain-link fence that separated the yard from the alley, Kaiser stood watch. The German shepherd's dark coat shimmered in the twilight, his ears alert, his eyes fixed on her. He had been trained to guard, to obey, to respond to commands. But in this moment, he simply stayed close, a quiet sentinel to her unspoken turmoil. A small pebble clicked against the fence. Grace looked up, startled. Beyond the mesh stood Noah, his hair ruffled, his shirt untucked from the hurried walk across town. He must have slipped away from his foster house after dinner. For a moment, they just stared at each other, both hesitant, as if afraid that even speaking aloud might invite the world to crush what little was theirs. Then Noah whispered, "You got in trouble, didn't you?" Grace nodded, her braid bobbing slightly. She said, "It's nonsense, that I'll forget." Noah gripped the fence with both hands, his knuckles pale. "I won't forget." The certainty in his voice pierced the twilight. Grace swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "Me neither." Kaiser padded closer, pressing his nose against the wire, sniffing at Noah's fingers. It was as though the dog recognized him, accepted him, and in that acceptance gave their friendship a witness too loyal to betray them. Grace slid down the steps and crouched near the fence, her face only inches from Noah's. "If they laugh at us, if they say we're too small to know anything, then we don't tell them," Noah finished, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "We just keep it ours." The silence between them swelled, not empty but full, like the pause before a promise too important to rush. Fireflies began to wink in the grass, their faint glow catching in Grace's hair like stars tangled in her braid. Noah reached through the fence, his fingers brushing hers. "Promise me, Grace, no matter what they say, no matter if they pull us apart." Her chest rose and fell quickly, her small heart pounding as though it understood the gravity of this vow more than her mind could. She pressed her palm to his, separated only by the thin weave of metal, and whispered, "Forever." Noah echoed it, his voice breaking slightly. Forever. Kaiser let out a low, almost approving sound in his throat, his gaze flicking between them with an uncanny solemnity. The children both turned to him at once, as if the shepherd were more than just a dog, as if he were the keeper of their secret, the guardian of a pact the world would not understand. Grace leaned closer to the fence. "If we can't say it out loud, then we'll say it here." She tapped her fingers against the cool metal. "This is our place. Right here. If we ever feel like they're winning, we'll come back." Noah nodded fiercely. "Even if it's dark, even if it's raining." They both smiled faintly, though their eyes carried a weight no 8-year-old should know. In the distance, a siren wailed faintly, a reminder of the world beyond their small corner, a world filled with danger, disappointment, and rules too complicated for them to grasp. But here, in the soft halo of twilight, they had carved out something untouchable. Kaiser shifted, his tail brushing the dirt. He moved closer until he sat squarely between them, one paw on Grace's side of the fence, the other pressed against the wire near Noah's hand. The sight made both children giggle softly, but the laughter faded into quiet reverence. Grace whispered, "See? He knows. He's part of it now." Noah grinned. "Then it's real, because Kaiser doesn't forget things." The shepherd lifted his head at the sound of his name, ears pricking, eyes glinting in the dim light. It was as if he accepted the role, not just as a police dog in training, not just as Grace's father's partner, but as the silent witness to a bond that would soon be tested. The first stars began to prick the sky. Grace's mother called from inside the house, her voice sharp but weary. "Grace, time for your bath." Grace flinched, torn between obeying and clinging to this fleeting moment. She pressed her fingers harder to Noah's. "Promise you won't let go, even if we have to pretend." "I won't," he whispered back, eyes fierce. She pulled away slowly, as though detaching a part of herself, and stood. Noah lingered by the fence until the back door creaked open and light spilled into the yard. Grace glanced once more over her shoulder before slipping inside, her heart racing with equal parts fear and defiance. Noah stood alone for a while, one hand still resting on the fence where her fingers had been. Then, with a deep breath, he turned and walked back toward the street. His shadow stretched long across the pavement, and though he felt small against the vastness of the night, he carried with him the warmth of her whispered word, forever. Behind him, Kaiser remained by the fence, eyes glimmering like coals in the dark. He stayed until the last of Noah's footsteps faded, then finally retreated to the porch. But even as he lay down, his ears stayed pricked, as if guarding not just the yard, but the fragile promises of two children who believed in each other more than the world believed in them. And in that quiet, beneath the first blanket of night, a silent pact was sealed, not written in dirt or spoken to adults, but carved into their hearts, guarded by a dog whose loyalty would soon prove stronger than fate itself. The Jensen dining room always carried a certain stillness in the evenings. The curtains were drawn, muting the world outside, while the overhead light hummed faintly, casting its pale glow across the oak table. Plates clinked, silverware scraped, and the scent of roasted chicken filled the air. Yet beneath that ordinary rhythm, Grace felt a tension already forming, the way clouds gather before a storm. Her father sat at the head of the table, shoulders squared, uniform shirt still on, though the tie hung loose. Officer Mark Jensen had the kind of presence that filled a room even when he said nothing, a man worn by long hours, bad news, and the weight of protecting a town that often forgot how fragile safety really was. His face was tired, eyes shadowed by the day's patrols, but his tone was sharp when he finally spoke. "Grace," he said, not looking up from carving the chicken. "Your mother tells me you were holding hands with that boy again. Noah, isn't it?" The fork slipped from Grace's hand and clattered against her plate. She froze, heart pounding, eyes darting to her mother, who avoided her gaze, busying herself with pouring water into glasses. "It wasn't," she began, her voice small. Mark set down the carving knife with a deliberate clink. Now his eyes were on her, steady and piercing, the kind of look that made even adults shift uncomfortably. "You're 8 years old," he said, each word measured but heavy. "You don't know what love is. You don't play games with things you don't understand." Grace shrank under the weight of his voice. She wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't a game, that Noah wasn't just another boy. But the lump in her throat grew too large. "It's nonsense," he added, harsher now, perhaps without meaning to. "And I won't have nonsense distracting you from what matters. School, family, being a child." Her chest tightened, as though his words had cracked something fragile inside her. She stared down at her plate, the chicken turning to blur and shadow through the film of tears she refused to let fall. Across the table, her mother cleared her throat softly. "Mark, she's just—" But Mark silenced her with a raised hand. His jaw was set, his expression immovable, as though he believed firmness now would save Grace from pain later. He couldn't see how much it already hurt. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the ticking of the kitchen clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Grace pushed food around her plate but couldn't swallow. The taste of the evening had soured, the warmth of home dimmed into something colder. Finally, she whispered, "It's not nonsense." The words slipped out before she could stop them. They trembled, but they were hers. Mark's brows furrowed, his voice rising. "What did you say?" She looked up, eyes shimmering with defiance and hurt. "It's not nonsense if it matters to me." For a second, the air itself seemed to pause. Mark stared at her, stunned by the fire in his daughter's usually gentle eyes. His instinct was to correct her, to crush the rebellion before it grew. But another part of him, quieter, buried under years of duty, recognized something else. She believed it, every word, and that was what scared him most. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, though the tension didn't leave his shoulders. "You're too young to know what matters," he muttered, softer now, but no less final. "One day, you'll understand I was right." Grace dropped her gaze again. This time, she didn't argue. She only pressed her lips together, holding back tears, her small frame rigid with the effort of containing the ache inside. Dinner continued, but the meal was tasteless. Every clink of silverware sounded like an echo of the words he'd spoken. When the plates were cleared, Grace excused herself quietly, retreating down the hall to her room. She closed the door softly, then pressed her back against it, her heart still racing. In the quiet, her father's words replayed over and over. "Nonsense. Too young. You'll forget." Each one felt like a stone, piling higher until she could hardly breathe beneath their weight. She crossed to her window, pushing it open just enough to let the night air in. Outside, the backyard stretched dimly beneath the moonlight. At the fence, as always, Kaiser lay on his side, ears flicking at the sound of her window. His head lifted, golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark, steady and sure. Grace pressed her forehead to the glass. "They don't understand," she whispered. Her voice cracked, but the dog's ears twitched as though he heard her anyway. And somewhere across town, in a room too small and too cold, Noah lay awake too, staring at the ceiling of his foster home. He didn't know why his chest hurt so much when grown-ups dismissed his feelings. He only knew it mattered. Grace mattered. The storm of words at dinner had passed, but its damage lingered. A crack had formed, invisible but real, in the glass of Grace's world. The first sign that innocence, no matter how fiercely defended, would not survive unchallenged. And yet, even through the ache, something else stirred inside her. A determination. If her father's stern voice tried to tell her what wasn't real, then she would hold tighter to the only thing that felt true. Forever. Grace closed her bedroom door with the softest click she could manage. The hallway light still seeped faintly through the crack at the bottom, but here the world was dim, wrapped in the muted blue shadows of evening. She leaned her back against the door, her breath shallow, as though the walls themselves were listening. The words from dinner still echoed in her chest. Nonsense. Too young. Forget. Each one had lodged like a thorn she couldn't pull free. Her father's voice had always carried weight, but tonight it felt like a hammer, flattening the fragile corners of her heart. She crossed the room slowly, the old floorboards creaking under her small feet. On her desk lay crayons scattered in a box, their paper sleeves frayed from countless drawings of trees and clouds and crooked hearts. She pulled the box close and began slipping a handful into her backpack. Next came her stuffed rabbit, frayed at the ears, a patch stitched clumsily on its belly from the time she'd ripped it climbing the fence. She hugged it once, pressing her face against its worn fur, before tucking it carefully on top of the crayons. The backpack sagged under the growing weight, but it wasn't enough. She looked around the room with wide, restless eyes, searching for other things she couldn't bear to leave behind. A sweater her grandmother had knit, its sleeves too long. A notebook, half filled with wobbly handwriting. She stacked them inside until the zipper strained to close. Her throat tightened. She didn't really know where she would go. She only knew she couldn't stay. Not when the world inside this house refused to believe her heart was real. A faint sound broke the silence. A soft scratch against the bottom of the door. Then a low whine. "Kaiser," she whispered. The shepherd's nose nudged the gap, pushing insistently until the door creaked open just enough for him to slip through. His dark coat brushed against the frame as he entered, his paws soundless on the floor. He approached slowly, ears tipped forward, eyes steady and bright in the dim light. Grace sank onto the bed, her backpack beside her. Her lips trembled as she reached out. Kaiser pressed his nose against her hand, then nudged harder until her fingers curled into his fur. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled. She buried her face into the thick ruff of his neck, her sobs muffled by his warmth. He stood solid and unmoving, like a pillar, absorbing every tremor of her small body. "They don't understand," she whispered through hiccuped breaths. "They think I'm silly. They think I'll forget him. But I won't. I can't." Kaiser gave a soft huff, his breath warm against her cheek, as if in agreement. His loyalty didn't need words. It was written in the steady beat of his chest, the firmness of his stance, the way he refused to leave her side. Grace pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. In their golden depths, she saw something more than obedience. She saw recognition, almost a reflection of her own sadness, as if he, too, knew what it meant to be misunderstood. Her hands tightened around the straps of the backpack. "I'll go. I'll take you with me. Then they can't tell me it's wrong anymore." The shepherd tilted his head, ears twitching, but didn't move away. His gaze lingered on the backpack, then back to her face, as if weighing the meaning of her words. Grace sniffled and wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. She sat cross-legged on the bed, the rabbit in her lap, and whispered, "Noah believes me. That's enough." The room grew still again, except for the faint tick of the alarm clock on the nightstand. Outside, a car passed down the street, headlights brushing briefly across the curtains, before vanishing. The ordinary world carried on, unaware of the storm brewing in the heart of an 8-year-old girl. Kaiser shifted closer, lowering himself onto the rug beside the bed. His body curved protectively toward her, his tail brushing against her knee. Grace leaned down to stroke his head, her small fingers combing through his fur. "You'll come with me, won't you?" she asked softly. "Even if I'm not supposed to go, even if Dad says no." The shepherd's ears flicked again. He let out a quiet rumble, not threatening but certain, a sound that spoke of decisions already made. Grace smiled weakly through her tears. "I knew you would." She lay back on the bed, hugging the rabbit tight, the backpack at her side like a shield. Kaiser rested his chin on the edge of the mattress, eyes half closed, but never leaving her. For a while, the grief eased under the comfort of his presence. But just before sleep tugged at her, she whispered one last thing into the darkness. "They can call it nonsense all they want, but it's forever, and forever means we don't let go." Kaiser's tail thumped once against the rug, a quiet vow of his own. The house slept heavily that night, wrapped in the hush of late hours and steady rain. The clock in the hallway ticked, each sound like a drumbeat counting down to something inevitable. Grace lay wide awake, staring at the ceiling of her small room, the stuffed rabbit clutched tight against her chest. Her father's words still echoed. "Nonsense. Too young. You'll forget." They had pressed into her like cold fingerprints she couldn't wash away. But beneath the hurt was a flicker of fire. She wouldn't forget. She wouldn't let them bury what she knew in her heart was real. Lightning flashed faintly beyond the curtains, followed by the soft patter of drizzle. The world outside seemed to whisper her name, daring her to move. Grace sat up, her small hands trembling as she slipped her backpack straps over her shoulders. The zipper was bulging, crayons and notebooks pressing against the seams, her rabbit's ear poking out at the top. She took one last look around her room, the posters on the wall, the bookshelf tilted with uneven stacks of storybooks, the desk where she had drawn so many hearts in crayon. Then she turned away, because looking too long might make her stay. The floor creaked under her feet as she tiptoed to the door. She paused, listening. Her mother's faint snore drifted from down the hall. The hum of the television murmured in her father's room, left on to soothe his restless nights. Grace eased the door open inch by inch until there was just enough space to slip through. Her bare feet padded softly down the hall, then onto the cold kitchen tiles. She reached the back door, hand hesitating on the knob. For a moment, fear pricked her courage. What if she was caught? What if Noah never even knew she tried? But then she pictured his face, the way his voice had steadied when he said, "Forever." That was enough. She turned the knob slowly, carefully, until the latch clicked open. The drizzle kissed her cheeks the instant she stepped outside. The night smelled of wet earth and lilac from the garden, heavy and damp. The backyard was cloaked in shadow, the porch light dim and flickering. Grace hurried across the yard, her shoes squishing softly in the wet grass. The chain-link gate loomed ahead, its latch glistening under raindrops. She dragged it open, wincing at the faint squeal of hinges, and slipped through into the alley beyond. Behind her, a low whine broke the silence. Kaiser. She spun around, eyes wide. The shepherd stood under the porch roof, his black coat slick with rain, amber eyes fixed on her. He hadn't made a sound until now, hadn't moved while she crossed the yard. For a heartbeat, he just stared, as if caught between the weight of training and the pull of something stronger. Grace's throat tightened. "You can't come," she whispered urgently, though her heart begged otherwise. "Dad will know. You have to stay." Kaiser took one slow step forward, paws pressing into the wet ground. Rain dotted his muzzle, dripping from his whiskers. His ears flicked back, conflicted, but his gaze never wavered from her. "Please," she whispered again, her voice breaking. "They'll blame you if you follow me." Another step, then another. The shepherd's chest rumbled with a soft sound. Not a growl, but a low note of certainty. And in that moment, the choice was made. Kaiser broke discipline. He trotted through the rain, muscles rippling under his soaked coat, until he stood at her side by the gate. Grace's tears mixed with raindrops as she pressed her hand against his neck. The heat of his body grounded her, gave her courage. "You really will come with me," she whispered, astonished and relieved. The shepherd shook water from his fur, droplets scattering like sparks in the dim light, then nudged her forward with his nose. Together they slipped into the night. The alley smelled of wet concrete and old leaves. Puddles reflected the dim glow of street lamps, rippling with every raindrop. Grace's backpack felt heavier with each step, but she clung to it, stubborn in her determination. Her small shoes splashed softly as she walked, the stuffed rabbit's ear bobbing with her stride. Kaiser moved close, his body brushing her leg now and then, his head swiveling as he scanned the shadows. His training was in every step, alert, cautious, but his loyalty was in the way he matched her pace, never straying. Grace glanced at him, whispering through chattering teeth, "You're braver than me." He flicked an ear at her voice but didn't slow. The drizzle thickened, turning the air to silver threads. Grace pulled her sweater tighter, her hair plastered to her cheeks. Every house she passed seemed asleep, every window glowing faintly with unreachable warmth. She felt invisible, a small figure swallowed by the dark, but Kaiser's steady presence kept her from unraveling. When she paused to catch her breath near the corner of Maple Street, Kaiser pressed his nose to her hand again, urging her onward. For the first time, Grace felt something new rising inside her, not just defiance, but power. The power of choosing for herself, even if she was only 8 years old. Her father's voice had told her she was too small to understand, that love was nonsense. But with Kaiser by her side, she felt taller than the night, bigger than the storm. She looked at him, her voice trembling but resolute. "It's us now, me and you, no matter what." Kaiser huffed softly, as though sealing the vow. And under the drizzle of rain, on a night when the rest of the town slept, a child's rebellion became something greater. The first step into a journey neither of them could have imagined, bound together not by rules, but by a promise stronger than any command: loyalty. The next morning dawned gray and brittle, clouds hanging low, as if the sky itself was undecided about letting the sun through. Noah walked the familiar path to school, with his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his backpack bouncing against his spine. Each step felt ordinary, but beneath the surface a quiet unease pulsed. He hadn't seen Grace since yesterday, hadn't even managed to wave goodnight across the fence. He told himself she was fine, that she'd show up with her braid half loose and her smile quick as always. But when he reached the schoolyard, the oak tree stood empty. Children swarmed the playground, filling the air with laughter and the shrill calls of tag. The swings creaked. The slide shone wet from last night's drizzle. But there was no Grace. Noah's eyes scanned the yard again and again, growing sharper with every pass. But the space under the oak was bare, just damp grass and a faint heart, drawn in the dirt, half washed away by rain. He froze, staring at that fading heart. His chest tightened as though someone had pressed a stone against it. A boy from his class noticed him lingering. "Looking for your girlfriend?" The boy jeered, loud enough for others to hear. Laughter rippled through a nearby group. A girl mimicked holding someone's hand and made an exaggerated kissing face. "Grace isn't here, Noah," she sang mockingly. "Guess she dumped you." The words stung more than he expected. Noah's fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't answer. His throat felt too tight, his voice too fragile to survive the weight of their laughter. Another boy chimed in. "Maybe she got tired of playing house with you. My mom says kids like us don't even know what love is." More laughter. It rose and spread, filling his ears until the world felt tilted. Noah's face burned, not from shame of his feelings, but from the cruelty of having them dismissed so easily, as if what he and Grace shared was just a silly game. He turned away, pushing past the jeers, and retreated toward the edge of the yard. His shoes scuffed the gravel, each step quicker than the last, carrying him to the only place that felt safe. The oak tree. There, he crouched low, touching the muddy heart in the dirt. The lines were blurred, the initials almost gone. He pressed his finger into it, tracing over what remained, fighting against the rain's attempt to erase it. "She wouldn't just forget," he whispered. The bell rang, echoing across the yard. But Noah lingered a second longer, his chest tight with unease. Only when the last of the children filed toward the doors did he rise and follow, his heart heavy, his mind spinning. Inside the classroom, Grace's absence grew louder with every minute. Her chair sat empty, the desk bare. Noah kept glancing at it, as though she might slip in late, breathless from running, her braid trailing behind her. But the minutes stretched, and still it remained empty. The teacher noticed. "Does anyone know why Grace isn't here today?" she asked casually, flipping through the attendance sheet. A few students shrugged. Someone muttered, "Probably grounded." Another whispered, "Maybe her parents finally told her to stop hanging around with Noah." More muffled giggles followed. Noah's ears rang. His hand gripped the edge of his desk until his knuckles ached. He wanted to shout that they didn't understand, that Grace wasn't just some passing friend, that she was forever. But the words caught in his throat, too raw to voice. The rest of the morning blurred. Lessons scratched across the blackboard, pencils tapped, papers rustled, all meaningless noise to Noah, whose gaze kept drifting to the empty chair. His stomach churned with unease, a feeling far heavier than just missing a classmate. At recess, he wandered the playground again, ignoring the games unfolding around him. He circled the oak tree, as if she might suddenly appear from behind its trunk, laughing at his worry. He searched the swing set, the slides, even the spot by the fence, where they sometimes whispered secrets. Nothing, only emptiness where she should have been. His classmates noticed his searching. One girl smirked. Maybe she finally realized she can do better. A boy added, Maybe she's hiding from you." The words struck like stones, but beneath the sting was something else. A creeping fear. Not the fear of being mocked, but of being right. Grace wasn't here. Grace, who had promised forever, who had pressed her hand to his through the fence, who had whispered that they would never let adults win. She wasn't here. Noah felt a hollowness spread through him, cold and sharp. When the bell rang again, calling them back to class, he didn't move right away. He stood under the oak, staring at the blurred heart in the dirt, until the last stragglers had gone inside. Then he whispered, "Where are you?" The drizzle began again, faint drops peppering the ground. Noah tilted his face toward the sky, letting the water cool his burning cheeks. He wasn't just missing her. He knew, somehow, that something was wrong. The kind of wrong no teasing could explain. By the time he walked back into the building, he had already decided. If Grace wasn't here tomorrow, if no one could tell him why, he would find her himself. No matter what it took. The following day unfolded like a cruel echo of the last. Grace's desk stayed empty, her name unanswered at roll call, her absence explained by nothing more than shrugs. By noon, Noah could no longer stand the weight of it. The teachers' voices blurred into noise, the lessons meaningless. All he could see was the empty chair beside him. By dismissal, his decision was made. If no one else cared enough to find out where she was, then he would. The streets of town felt different when walked with a secret purpose. Noah's sneakers slapped the pavement as he slipped away from the steady line of children heading home. He ducked down side roads, past shuttered shops and cracked sidewalks, his backpack thumping against his spine. He didn't tell his guardians where he was going. They wouldn't have listened, wouldn't have believed that Grace was in trouble. The sky sagged low, heavy with clouds. Somewhere distant, a train whistle moaned, its sound hollow, as though it came from another world. Noah pulled his hood up and walked faster. He didn't know exactly where to search, only that he needed to look in places no one else would. Adults always thought children stayed where they were told. Grace wouldn't. She had promised forever, and forever meant she wouldn't just vanish. The town thinned into the industrial district, a place he had only seen from car windows. Here, warehouses loomed like silent giants, their walls streaked with rust, their windows either broken or sealed with boards. Long-haul trucks idled at loading docks, engines rumbling like beasts too tired to sleep. The air smelled of diesel and wet concrete, sharp and unwelcoming. Noah's steps slowed. The playground, the school, the tidy streets of neighborhoods were gone. Here, the world belonged to shadows. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to keep moving. His eyes darted from corner to corner, searching for any glimpse of Grace, her braid, her sweater, anything familiar. The silence pressed down on him, broken only by the hiss of steam pipes and the occasional clang of metal from unseen hands. He whispered her name under his breath, as though calling it softly might draw her out. Grace. That was when he felt it. Eyes on him. Two men stood near the back of a warehouse, half hidden in shadow. Their clothes were mismatched, one in a dirty hoodie, the other in a jacket several sizes too big. They leaned against crates as though they belonged there, but their attention was fixed on him, sharp and unyielding. Panic fluttered in Noah's chest. He dropped his gaze and tried to walk past, quickening his pace, but one of them stepped forward, his sneakers slapping the wet ground. "Hey, kid," the man called, his voice smooth, almost friendly. "You look lost." Noah froze. His instincts screamed at him to keep walking, but the word lost hooked him. He turned slightly, his voice shaky. "I'm looking for someone." The other man exchanged a glance with his companion, then smiled thinly. "A girl, right?" Small brown hair, braid. Noah's heart leapt. Yes. The men stepped closer, their shadows stretching long under the flickering lamplight. We saw her, the man in the hoodie said casually, as if mentioning the weather. She was here yesterday. I looked scared. Said her name was Grace. Every thought in Noah's head stilled. Grace had been here. He was right. His pulse hammered so hard he felt dizzy. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice breaking with urgency. The taller man crouched slightly to meet his eyes, his smile too wide, too practiced. "We can take you to her. She needs a friend right now." Relief surged so quickly, Noah almost stumbled forward. But deep down, a tiny voice, the same voice that whispered warnings when he crossed streets too quickly, tried to break through. Something about the men's smiles, about the way they blocked the path behind him, felt wrong. He hesitated, clutching the strap of his backpack. Why didn't you tell the police?" The man's smile flickered. "Cops don't care about kids like her," he said smoothly. "But we do. Do you want to see her or not?" The drizzle began again, soft drops pattering against the concrete. Noah's hood clung to his hair, cold water slipping down his neck. He looked from one man to the other, his chest tightening. They spoke as though they knew Grace, as though they'd seen her. But their eyes were hungry. Still, the thought of walking away was unbearable. What if they were telling the truth? What if Grace needed him and he failed to act? He nodded slowly. "Okay." The men's grins widened. "Smart kid. Come on. She's just down the street." They gestured toward the far end of the district, where the warehouses thickened and the streetlights grew sparse. Noah's sneakers squeaked on the wet pavement as he followed, his heart pounding between hope and fear. Every instinct inside him shouted to turn back. But the image of Grace, alone, frightened, waiting, dragged him forward. And behind him, unnoticed in the rain, his fading footprints blurred under the weight of the storm that was only beginning. The industrial district grew darker the farther Noah followed the two men. Street lamps flickered uncertainly, their weak halos of light broken by shadows stretching from the hulking warehouses. Trucks idled along the curb, their engines low and guttural, releasing plumes of exhaust that hung in the damp air. At first, Noah tried to convince himself that this was right, that these men really had seen Grace, that every uneasy step was bringing him closer to her. But the further they went, the quieter the streets became. The laughter and chatter of the town were gone, replaced by the hollow clang of distant machinery and the drip of rainwater spilling from cracked gutters. Something inside him clenched. The taller man, the one in the oversized jacket, glanced back at him with a smile too sharp to be kind. "Not far now," he said. "She was crying for someone. Maybe for you." Noah's chest tightened. His heart leapt at the thought. Grace calling his name, needing him. That image alone kept him moving, though his feet felt heavier with every step. They turned down a narrow alley between two warehouses, where the light failed almost completely. A van sat parked at the far end, its paint chipped, its back doors slightly ajar. Noah slowed, unease prickling the back of his neck. The man in the hoodie noticed. "What's wrong, kid?" he asked lightly, though there was steel under his words. "She's just in here. Don't you want to see her?" Noah's voice wavered. Why? Why would she be in a van? Neither man answered. They only shared a look. The one in the jacket moved first. With a suddenness that stole the breath from Noah's lungs, he grabbed the boy's arm, yanking hard. "No!" Noah cried, twisting, trying to wrench free. His backpack slipped from his shoulder, tumbling to the ground, crayons scattering across the wet pavement. The stuffed rabbit landed in a puddle, its patched belly soaking through instantly. "Quiet," the man hissed, dragging him toward the van. The boy kicked and clawed, desperation lending him strength, but the man was stronger, his grip iron. The other stepped in quickly, clamping a rough hand over Noah's mouth. Terror exploded inside him. He tried to scream, but it came out muffled, swallowed by the calloused palm. His eyes darted wildly, searching for escape, for someone, anyone. But the alley was empty, the night deaf to his struggle. They hauled him to the van. The doors creaked open wider, revealing only darkness within. A hollow space that smelled of metal and damp rope. Noah thrashed, his sneakers scraping against the ground, his heart pounding so loudly it drowned out the rain. Then the man's hand slipped, just enough. Noah's voice tore free, high and broken. "Grace!" he screamed, the name ripping from his throat like a lifeline. He shouted again, louder, rawer, until his voice cracked. "Grass!" The sound echoed against the steel walls of the warehouses, stretching out into the night. It was a cry of terror, of desperation, of a boy clinging to the only name that meant safety. The men cursed, shoving him hard into the van. He stumbled and fell, his palms slamming against the cold floor. The doors slammed shut behind him, with a metallic thud that reverberated through his bones. Darkness swallowed him whole. Inside, the air was damp and suffocating. His breaths came quick, shallow, trembling. He pounded the doors with his fists, his voice hoarse. "Grace! Grace!" But the night outside seemed to swallow the sound. Or so it seemed. Miles away in the Jensen backyard, Kaiser stirred. The shepherd had been lying under the porch, ears twitching at every distant rumble. When Noah's cry ripped through the air, faint but unmistakable, his head snapped up, his ears pricked, his entire body rigid. Another cry followed, thinner now, almost lost to the drizzle. But Kaiser heard it. He knew that voice. A low growl rumbled from his chest. He rose to his feet, muscles tense, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the fence. Something was wrong. Something was calling. Inside the van, Noah curled against the wall, his fists trembling, his breath catching. His stuffed rabbit was gone, his backpack left behind. For the first time, he felt truly small, swallowed by a world too big, too cruel. But outside, carried on the damp wind, his cry had found ears loyal enough to answer. Kaiser paced at the fence, his paws pressing against the earth, his nose tilted high as he pulled the faint scent from the rain. His tail bristled, his body thrumming with urgency. He barked once, sharp and commanding, a sound that cut through the quiet street like a blade. And though Grace, tucked in bed upstairs, stirred faintly at the sound, it was Kaiser alone who understood. The boy's cry was not just sound, it was a summons. And he would answer. The night pressed heavy against the town, the drizzle thickening into a steady mist that slicked rooftops and turned dirt paths into rivers of mud. Grace had been dozing in her bed, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, when Kaiser's bark split the silence. It wasn't his usual bark, not the sharp alert he gave for squirrels or the low warning growl at strangers near the fence. This was deeper, urgent, filled with a vibration that stirred her from sleep instantly. She sat up, heart pounding, listening. Another bark. Then, a whine that rose like a plea. She scrambled to the window and pushed it open. Kaiser was below, pacing furiously by the gate, his leash dragging in the mud where it had slipped loose from the porch rail. His black coat gleamed wet in the moonlight, his movements restless, his head tilted high, as though he were pulling a scent straight from the night. "Kaiser?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He stopped pacing and looked up at her. His eyes burned with something she couldn't name. Urgency, desperation, maybe even command. He barked once more, sharp and demanding, then lunged at the gate, tugging on the leash with his teeth. Grace hesitated. Her father was asleep, her mother too. She wasn't supposed to leave. But in the pit of her stomach, she felt the echo of something larger, something true. Kaiser wasn't barking at nothing. She slipped into her sweater and padded down the hall, careful not to wake anyone. The kitchen floor was cold beneath her bare feet as she unlocked the back door. The drizzle hit her cheeks as she stepped outside, her braid dampening instantly. Kaiser bounded to her, shoving his nose into her palm, then turned sharply toward the alley. He growled low, pulling the leash taut. "Wait," Grace whispered, clutching the strap. "Where are you going? What is it?" But he didn't wait. With a force that surprised her, Kaiser lunged forward, dragging her off the porch and into the yard. Grace stumbled, nearly falling, her shoes sinking into the mud. "Stop," she cried, trying to dig in her heels. But the shepherd was relentless. He pulled with the strength of something beyond training, a primal instinct, sharpened by years of discipline, yet fueled now by urgency no command could override. His ears were pinned forward, his body taut with purpose. Grace clutched the leash with both hands, her heart racing. "Kaiser, please." "Where are we going?" He didn't answer, couldn't, but his body spoke clearly. His nose dipped low, catching a scent carried faintly on the damp air. His stride quickened, dragging her through the backyard, through the gate she had slipped out of the night before, and into the dark alley beyond. The ground squelched underfoot, puddles splashing up her legs. Her sweater clung to her skin, her braid plastered to her neck. She stumbled again, her knees scraping the gravel, but Kaiser yanked her upright without pause. Tears blurred her vision. "I can't," she sobbed. "Please, slow down." But the shepherd ignored her pleas. His chest rumbled with determination, his tail stiff, his body arrowed forward like a soldier breaking rank. And then, faintly, Grace heard it too. It wasn't clear at first, just a whisper caught in the rain. But then it came again. A voice, thin and broken, echoing through the industrial district. A name, her name. "Grace!" She gasped, her legs buckling. "Noah!" Kaiser barked sharply, as though confirming it. He yanked her forward, harder now, his paws splashing through mud and water as he pulled her deeper into the alleys. Grace stumbled after him, clutching the leash, her small body half dragged, half carried by his unstoppable momentum. "Noah!" she cried back, her voice tearing through the night, but the sound was swallowed by the rain, her words scattering uselessly into the dark. The shepherd surged ahead, ignoring her cries to stop, ignoring the scrape of her shoes and the tears streaking down her cheeks. He wasn't following orders anymore. He was following something greater. A call only he could hear, a cry that had cut through the night and lodged in his bones. They passed between warehouses, shadows looming high like walls. Trucks idled nearby, their engines rumbling like predators waiting to pounce. Grace's heart slammed in her chest. Every corner felt dangerous, every shadow alive. "Kaiser, please," she begged, but her words were lost beneath the growl vibrating through his chest. Her lungs burned from the pace, her legs trembling with exhaustion, but still she clung to the leash, because letting go felt impossible. As much as she wanted him to stop, she also knew, deep down, that he was leading her towards something that mattered. Noah's voice echoed again, faint but undeniable. It sent a shiver racing down her spine. Kaiser pulled harder, dragging her around a corner where the mud thickened into sucking patches. She fell once more, her palms slamming into the ground, mud streaking her arms. He circled back, barking furiously until she scrambled up again, then resumed his charge without hesitation. Grace's tears mixed with rain, her breaths ragged. "Okay," she whispered finally, no longer fighting. "Okay, Kaiser. Take me." And so he did. Through alleys and shadows, through mud and rain, the shepherd led her with unyielding force. His loyalty was no longer to rules, no longer to the commands drilled into him by her father. His loyalty was to her, to the cry he had heard, to the bond no human could sever. By the time they reached the edge of the industrial district, Grace's legs were shaking, her sweater soaked, her face streaked with tears. But Kaiser stood tall, chest heaving, nose lifted toward the dark ahead. He barked once, sharp and commanding, the sound carrying into the night like a signal flare, and in that moment, Grace understood. He wasn't just pulling her forward, he was pulling her into the heart of something far bigger than either of them. Something dangerous, something terrifying, but something they couldn't turn away from. The rain had thickened into a curtain, turning the alleys slick and treacherous. Puddles reflected the dull glow of street lamps, fractured by each drop that fell. Kaiser surged ahead, powerful and relentless, the leash taut in Grace's small hands. Her legs burned, every step jarring through her body, but the shepherd did not slow. Her shoes slapped against the wet pavement, soaking through until her toes were numb. The backpack thumped against her shoulders, heavy with crayons and a stuffed rabbit that suddenly felt foolish compared to the weight of the night pressing on her. Her lungs heaved, sharp and raw, her breaths loud against the silence of the abandoned streets. She stumbled. Her knees slammed the ground, water splashing up around her. Pain flared, sharp and hot, and for a moment she stayed there, palms pressed to the cold pavement, rain dripping into her eyes. Kaiser stopped just ahead, turning instantly. His body coiled with urgency, his chest heaving as he barked once, demanding she rise. Grace shook her head, tears mixing with the rain. "I can't," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, fragile, barely audible above the storm. "I can't do this." The shepherd barked again, louder, insistent. His paws stamped in the puddles, tail stiff, his whole body radiating the same message, "You must." Grace pressed her forehead against her muddy palms, shoulders shaking. She wanted to stop, to go back, to crawl into her bed where the world was small and safe. But then, through the storm in her chest, through the pounding of her own heartbeat, she remembered Grace, the echo of Noah's voice, thin, trembling, desperate. It hadn't been a dream. It hadn't been her imagination. He had called for her. Her head snapped up, her braid plastered against her cheek. The memory of that cry pierced through her exhaustion like a blade cutting through fog. Noah's voice was out there, somewhere in this darkness, needing her. Grace's lips trembled. "He called me." Kaiser stepped closer, pressing his wet nose against her shoulder, nudging her upright. His eyes gleamed, steady and unyielding, as if he too had heard that cry and was carrying it inside his chest. Grace staggered to her feet, her knees throbbing, mud streaking down her legs. Her sweater clung heavy and cold, but she tightened her grip on the leash until her knuckles whitened. "I'll keep going," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "I have to." Kaiser barked once in answer, then turned, pulling forward again. Not as harshly this time, but firm, steady. His stride adjusted to match her stumbling steps. Grace pushed herself onward, each footfall a test of will. Her muscles screamed, her chest ached, but with every block they crossed, the sound of Noah's cry replayed in her mind. She clung to it like a lantern in the dark, a reminder that this wasn't about her pain or her fear. It was about him. They passed rows of warehouses, each one looming taller, their windows like empty eyes staring down. Somewhere nearby, a truck backfired, the sudden noise jolting Grace so hard she nearly collapsed again. Kaiser spun, teeth bared, growling low until the sound faded into silence. Only then did he continue, pressing forward, every sense sharp. Grace swallowed her sobs, hugging the rabbit poking out of her backpack closer to her side. She whispered into the rain, as though Noah could hear her across the distance. "Hold on. Please hold on." The streets narrowed, alleys bending into darker corners. The drizzle soaked through everything, blurring the world until it seemed unreal, like a half-formed dream. Grace's small shadow, tethered to Kaiser's larger one, stretched and vanished against the slick pavement. Every step forward was agony, yet also victory. Her legs wanted to give out, but her heart pushed her onward. Each time her body faltered, she pictured Noah's face, pale, frightened, whispering her name into the dark. That image became her strength. By the time they reached a loading dock, Grace was trembling from head to toe. She leaned against the cold metal, gasping for breath, while Kaiser stood guard at her side. His ears pricked, his nose lifting, his body vibrating with the certainty that they were closer now. Grace closed her eyes briefly, drawing in the damp, metallic air. She let the memory of Noah's voice fill her, steadying her, hardening her against the exhaustion that clawed at her bones. When she opened her eyes, her gaze was fierce in a way no child should have been. "Let's find him," she whispered to Kaiser. The shepherd gave a low huff, then surged forward again. Grace followed, no longer dragged, but choosing each painful step. Together, they plunged deeper into the maze of shadows, the rain washing their tracks into nothing. A girl and her dog, small, fragile against the sprawl of the industrial district, yet carrying a courage born not of strength, but of love. The precinct glowed with a sterile brightness that seemed out of place against the midnight rain. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting long reflections across the tiled floor. Officers moved in and out of the lobby, some shaking water from their coats, others balancing cups of lukewarm coffee. It was another long night in a small town that rarely slept, even when it should. Then the front doors banged open. Grace stumbled inside, her sweater clinging heavy to her small frame, her shoes squelching with every frantic step. Mud streaked her knees, her braid hung limp and dripping. Tears carved clean tracks down her rain-soaked face. She ran past the desk sergeant without hesitation and straight into the arms of her father. "Daddy!" she sobbed, her voice raw. Her backpack slipped from her shoulders, crashing onto the floor. "He's gone. Noah, he's gone." Officer Mark Jensen stiffened, caught off guard by the sudden weight of his daughter clinging to him. His arms instinctively wrapped around her, steadying her trembling body. He glanced over her shoulder, confusion knitting his brow. "What are you doing here? You should be at home, Grace," he said, his tone clipped, more weary than gentle. "What happened?" She pulled back just enough to look up at him, her eyes wide and frantic. "Noah! They took him. He was calling for me. I heard him, Daddy. Kaiser heard him too." Her words tumbled out in gasps, each one sharper than the last. Around them, officers paused, watching with curiosity. A child bursting in at midnight was unusual, even in this town. Mark crouched down, gripping her shoulders firmly. "Grace, slow down. Noah's probably at home, sleeping. You're tired. You're imagining things." "No!" she screamed, shaking her head violently. Her braid flung droplets across his uniform. "I heard him. He called my name. Kaiser knows. I swear it's real." Mark's jaw tightened. He looked past her to the shepherd standing at the threshold. Kaiser was drenched, his coat slick and shining under the fluorescent lights. Mud clung to his paws. His chest rose and fell rapidly, but it was his eyes that caught Mark's attention. They burned, sharp, unyielding, fixed not on the room, but on him. The dog growled low, the sound reverberating through the lobby like distant thunder. Mark had heard Kaiser growl before, during drills, when strangers approached the yard, when danger brushed close. But this was different. This wasn't a warning. It was a demand. Grace pressed her small fists against her father's chest. "Please believe me. He's out there. He's in trouble." Mark's instinct warred within him. The officer in him wanted to dismiss it as a child's nightmare, a product of too many stories, too much imagination. But the father in him, the one who had tucked her into bed night after night, the one who knew the truth in her eyes, felt the weight of her words. Kaiser's growl deepened, his muscles taut, his gaze unblinking. He stepped forward, the sound vibrating through the floor. Several officers shifted uneasily, exchanging glances. One muttered, "He's never acted like that before." Mark exhaled, his grip on Grace softening. He looked down at her trembling form, then back at the shepherd who had never once broken training, until tonight. "You're telling me," he said slowly, carefully, "that Noah's in danger, and Kaiser heard him too?" Grace nodded fiercely, tears still streaming. "He called my name. I heard him. Please, Daddy, please." The silence in the room thickened. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, a steady reminder of time slipping away. Mark studied Kaiser again. The shepherd stood rigid, ears pinned forward, his tail straight, his entire body pointed toward the door as if waiting for permission to move. His growl faded into a sharp bark that cracked through the tension like lightning. It jolted Mark to his core. He had worked with canines long enough to know when instinct overrode everything else. And this was no false alarm. He rose slowly, placing a steady hand on Grace's shoulder. His voice dropped, quieter now, but filled with something new. Respect. "All right," he said. "Show me." Grace gasped, her chest heaving, a flicker of hope cutting through her tears. Kaiser barked again, short and urgent, then spun toward the door, ready to lead. The officers in the lobby exchanged uncertain looks. One spoke up. "Sir, are we really?" Mark cut him off with a glance sharp enough to silence doubt. "You've all seen him tonight. That dog knows something, and I'm not ignoring it." Grace clung to her father's hand, her small fingers trembling in his. She felt the shift in him, the moment he stopped dismissing her as a frightened child, and began to believe. Together, the three of them, father, daughter, and dog, stepped back into the rain. The night had not grown kinder. The drizzle soaked them instantly, the streets shining with water and shadow. But for the first time, Grace felt the storm inside her steady. Her father was listening now, and Kaiser was leading. She squeezed her father's hand tighter, whispering into the downpour, "Hold on, Noah. We're coming." The patrol car idled at the curb, headlights slicing weak beams through the rain. Mark Jensen gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles paled, jaw locked in a tension that had nothing to do with the weather. Dispatch murmured in the background, but none of it reached him. Grace sat in the passenger seat, small body swallowed by the seatbelt. Her braid clung damp to her sweater. Her fingers twisted the ear of a stuffed rabbit nearly to breaking. Red, pleading eyes locked on him, willing him to believe. In the back, Kaiser paced, nails clicking against vinyl. His breath fogged the glass, body taut as a bowstring, sharp whines breaking into barks aimed at the windshield. His stare never left the dark streets. Mark closed his eyes. He'd been a cop long enough to know better than to chase ghosts. A child's story, a dog's growl, not evidence. Logic said Noah was home, safe. That was the easy answer. But Grace's voice pierced him. You don't believe me. You think I'm making it up. But I'm not. He called for me. I heard him. Kaiser heard him. Mark turned. No mischief in her face, only desperation. And truth. Sweetheart, I want to believe you. But I can't just... You're not just a policeman. Her words shook the air. You're my dad. The blow landed hard. He'd worn the badge so long it felt like it had swallowed everything soft in him. But in Grace's eyes, he wasn't Sergeant Jensen. He was her father. And she was begging him for faith. Kaiser barked again, pounding a paw against the seat, body straining forward. His growl vibrated through the car. Mark thought of all the times the shepherd had been right. Every single time. And now both child and dog told him the same thing. Grace's voice fell to a whisper. If it was me out there, would you believe me? The question cut him. He turned to her, throat tight. This wasn't an argument. It was survival. Rain hammered the roof. Wipers squealed. Officer or father? Logic or instinct? Law or love? Kaiser barked once more, sharp as a gavel. Mark loosened his grip, words slipping out. Then we follow him. God help me. We follow the dog. Grace sobbed in relief. Thank you, Daddy. He reached over, squeezed her hand. The weight of the choice pressed down heavy. Shadows or truth. He shifted into gear. Kaiser lunged, tail thudding, body a compass locked on the storm. Grace pressed her forehead to the glass. Hold on, Noah. We're coming. The precinct conference room smelled of stale coffee and damp uniforms. Rain tapped against the windows as Mark spread a town map across the table, pins marking routine incidents. Nothing screamed urgency, not until Kaiser did. The shepherd prowled, dripping rain, chest rising with pent-up energy. Free of his leash, he was a caged storm. Grace sat, swinging her legs, clutching her rabbit, watching him like he held the only truth left. This is madness, Mark muttered. A dog, a hunch, a child's word. Kaiser stopped. His head snapped to the map. With a leap, his paws slammed the table. Papers fluttered, coffee spilled. Kaiser! Mark barked, ignored. The dog clawed across the laminated surface until his nails dug into the industrial district. He barked, sharp, unrelenting, gouging deep scratches over the printed warehouses. Daddy, look! He knows! Grace cried. Mark froze. He wanted to dismiss it as random, but there was nothing random in the blaze of the shepherd's eyes. The growl rumbling in his throat sounded less like warning and more like judgment. Mark remembered whispers, children vanishing, no bodies, no answers. Cases written off as runaways. Too convenient. His chest tightened. What if Noah wasn't the first? Grace tugged his sleeve. You said dogs know things people don't. Why won't you listen? Her voice was fragile, her eyes fierce, pleading not just for her friend, but for the truth. Mark met Kaiser's stare. The shepherd's paw stayed pressed to the warehouses, as if pinning Mark to accountability. You're telling me where to go, aren't you? He whispered. Kaiser barked once, perfectly timed, silencing doubt. Please, Daddy, don't wait, Grace urged. Every rule screamed for evidence, backup, procedure. But instincts, buried for years, told him waiting meant another missing child. He recalled a boy found weeks earlier near that district, too terrified to speak. They'd assumed it was isolated. He wasn't sure anymore. Maybe I've been blind, he admitted. Grace sobbed in relief. Kaiser barked, ready. Mark rose. Then we go where he leads. Grace wiped her cheeks, nodding fiercely. Kaiser leapt down, pacing to the door, barking for haste. Mark grabbed his jacket, holstered his weapon. His chest tightened with dread. If the dog was right, the night held horrors. If wrong, only shadows. But there was no room left for doubt. The hunt had begun. Rain poured harder as Mark stepped outside, jacket pulled tight. For years, he'd entered nights like this with orders, backup, protocol. Tonight, none of those. Only a dog's instinct, a child's plea, a father's choice. Mark, what are you doing? The desk sergeant called. You don't have clearance. Wait for morning. Mark looked down at Grace, clutching her rabbit, pale but fierce. Grace, you should stay here. No, Noah needs me. If you leave me, I'll run after you anyway. Stubborn fire burned in her eyes. Kaiser barked sharply, circling, furious at delay. His body screamed urgency. If I'm wrong, write the reprimand tomorrow, Mark told the sergeant. But if I'm right and we wait, another kid doesn't come home. The protest died. Silence thickened. Mark tightened his grip on the leash. Come on. Grace's small hand slid into his. Together, they stepped into the storm. The patrol car cut through slick streets. Mark turned the radio down to static. No orders, no doubt. Not tonight. Grace sat rigid, rabbit pressed tight. In back, Kaiser pressed against the glass, growls rising whenever the car veered from his path. His body was a compass. Mark followed. City lights thinned to the looming shapes of warehouses, the industrial district. Foreboding thickened with every mile. Mark thought of the missing. The files closed too easily. Denial no longer fits. Daddy? Grace's voice was small. You believe us now, don't you? I believe enough to follow. That's all we need. Kaiser barked suddenly, paw scraping the door. Mark slowed, following his gaze. Ahead, trucks idled near a warehouse, engines rumbling despite the hour. Shadows moved along the dock. Too many for a place long abandoned. Grace's breath caught. Noah's there. I know it. Mark said nothing. He pulled to the curb, pulse hammering. He brushed Grace's wet hair back. Stay behind me. No matter what happens, you stay with Kaiser. She nodded, trembling but firm. He unholstered his weapon, metal cold in his hand. Rain drummed like a warning. He glanced at Kaiser, rigid, coiled, eyes locked forward. Okay, Mark muttered. We go into the night. And together, a weary officer torn between duty and fatherhood, a child clutching a rabbit as armor, and a dog whose instincts refused to be ignored. They stepped toward the shadows waiting in the storm. The industrial district loomed like a graveyard of giants. Warehouses stood shoulder to shoulder, their corrugated skins rusted and scarred, windows fractured and black. Rainwater trickled down their sides, dripping into puddles that mirrored the sickly glow of broken street lamps. Every sound carried. The groan of warped steel, the squeal of a loose sign, the steady drip from a bent gutter. Mark, Grace, and Kaiser moved carefully through the maze. Every step was measured. The further they went, the more the world of neighbors and shopfronts disappeared. These streets belonged to shadows. Kaiser led the way, body low, tail rigid, ears swiveling. His black coat glistened under the lamps, paws leaving wet prints across the cracked pavement. Every few yards he froze, head snapping to some unseen corner, a growl rumbling before he pressed forward again. Grace clung to her father's hand, stuffed rabbit tucked beneath her arm. Her legs trembled from fatigue, but she never complained. Wide eyes scanned every alley, each echo making her flinch. "Stay close," Mark whispered. His free hand gripped his weapon, low but ready. Police training urged him to radio for backup, but instinct, deeper than orders, told him waiting could mean losing Noah forever. A sudden clang rang from a nearby alley. Grace gasped, clutching his arm. Kaiser spun, barking, hackles raised. Mark raised his gun, sighting the shadows. Rain shimmered in the light. And then, only a rat scurried across trash before vanishing into a wall crack. Mark exhaled. False alarm. Grace pressed her face against his sleeve. "It's too loud here." He crouched low, meeting her eyes. "I know, but you're safe with me. And with him." He nodded at Kaiser, who stood sentry, growl still vibrating. They pressed on, weaving deeper. Rusted ladders clung to walls, doors sagged on broken hinges, graffiti slashed across every surface like scars. Silence felt alive, magnifying each drip, each hollow creak. Mark's pulse quickened with every sound. He had walked dangerous streets before, but never with his daughter at his side. Never with the weight of a missing boy pulling him forward. At an alley's crossroads, Kaiser halted. Nose worked furiously. Then he lunged left, claws scraping concrete. He barked once, urgent. Mark followed, tension ratcheting. Grace stumbled beside him. "Is Noah close?" she whispered. "We'll find out," Mark said, though certainty eluded him. They passed a loading dock slick with rain. A broken chain swung overhead, creaking against silence. Kaiser's nose pressed lower, pulling harder. Mark's thoughts spiraled. The rumors, the missing children, the reports of vans near neighborhoods. Coincidences he'd once dismissed now clawed at him. Then, a muffled thump. Heavy, deliberate, not rats, not rain. Grace froze. "Daddy?" Kaiser lunged forward with such force Mark had to brace the leash. His whole body vibrated, eyes fixed on a row of warehouses ahead. Mark crouched to Grace. "From here on, you don't let go of Kaiser, understand?" She nodded fiercely, clutching leash and rabbit both. Mark rose, weapon steady. Echoes pressed in, wrapping them like a trap. Kaiser barked, the sound booming off the walls, then surged forward, dragging them deeper into the labyrinth. Up ahead, light spilled from a half-open warehouse door. A sick yellow glow fractured across puddles. For the first time, the district no longer felt abandoned. Mark signaled Grace low. They crouched behind a stack of rusted barrels. Kaiser flattened instantly, chest brushing ground, a growl caught in his throat. Inside, shadows moved. Men carried crates in rhythm beneath a flickering bulb. Words floated out, muffled but clear enough. "Get it loaded before dawn." Another voice snapped. "The kids don't move themselves. Make sure they're quiet before the trucks roll." Grace's breath hitched. Her fingers dug into the rabbit, clutching it until fabric strained. She whispered into her father's sleeve, "Kids." They said kids. Mark's jaw clenched. Fear became certainty. The rumors, the missing children. This wasn't one boy. It was bigger, darker. The word thundered inside him. Trafficking. The men stepped into light, rough and unshaven. One lit a cigarette, its flame showing the hollowness in his eyes. Another muttered, "If the boss says midnight, then midnight. No screw-ups." Grace mouthed Noah's name, tears brimming. Mark steadied her shoulder, though his heart hammered. Kaiser pressed forward, growl rising. "Not yet," Mark whispered, tightening the leash. A crate slammed shut, echoing like a gunshot. Grace flinched, whispering, "They have Noah. We have to help him." Mark's throat constricted. Her plea echoed his own heart. But 2 men here meant more inside. No backup, no warrant, no authority, but badge, gun, and a dog's instinct. "Be smart," he whispered. Another voice inside, "Keep them quiet." "The last thing we need is someone hearing." Grace stiffened, eyes brimming. In her mind she saw Noah, trembling, calling her name in the dark. Her whisper was fierce. "We can't wait." Mark studied her. Fear blazed into determination. He looked at Kaiser, still coiled and ready. There was no turning back. He tightened his jaw. "Stay behind me, no matter what." Grace nodded, wiping tears. Rabbit clutched like armor. Kaiser pressed forward another step, vibrating with need. The men moved deeper inside, voices fading. For a moment, only rain filled the night. Mark crouched lower, mind a storm. Children were inside. Noah was inside. This nightmare was real. He exhaled slowly. "This ends tonight." A glow bled from the warehouse doorway, spilling jagged shapes across wet pavement. Mark, Grace, and Kaiser crouched behind barrels, pressed close to the metal. Grace's breathing came shallow, her rabbit damp against her lips to stifle sound. Mark held her close, gun steady. Kaiser lay still, muscles rippling with restrained urgency. A cigarette flared. A man stepped into the doorway, exhaling smoke before strolling into the alley. Boots splashed closer. Grace clung tighter. Mark mouthed, "Stay still." The flashlight snapped on, the beam cutting through the rain. It swept across the alley, bouncing closer to their hiding place. Mark's pulse thundered. The beam crept toward the barrels. Kaiser moved first. He darted into the shadows, slamming into a rusted stack of barrels. The crash was deafening. Metal clanged and rolled in cacophony. "Who's there?" the guard barked, swinging his flashlight toward the noise. He cursed, striding away from Mark and Grace. His boots pounded after the sound, muttering, "Stupid strays." Mark held Grace still. Awe flickered through his fear. Kaiser hadn't just reacted. He had chosen. Seconds dragged, suffocating. No alarm, no flashlight returning. Only water dripping, boots fading. Then Kaiser reappeared from the opposite alley, chest heaving, coat slick, eyes burning with certainty. He pressed his nose against Grace's hand. She sobbed softly, whispering into his damp fur, good boy, Kaiser." Mark exhaled, shoulders sagging. He bought us time. Precious seconds. Inside, voices barked again. "Hurry it up. Midnight's coming fast. No mistakes." Each word felt like nails hammered into wood. Noah's time was running out. Mark looked at Grace, pale, fierce. Then at Kaiser, rigid and quivering. The shepherd had risked himself without hesitation. Mark gritted his teeth. "We move now." He bent low to Grace. "Stay with Kaiser, no matter what." She nodded, clutching her rabbit like a shield. Mark straightened, eyes locked on the glowing doorway. The rain still poured, the echoes still pressed close. But his fear had hardened into resolve. He was no longer trapped between duty and doubt. He was a father and a cop, walking into the storm with a shepherd at his side. And for the first time, the shadows ahead felt less certain of their victory. Because shadows could not silence a cry already heard. The rain faded once they slipped inside the warehouse, replaced by the hum of generators and the thud of crates shifting deeper in the dark. The air stank of rust, damp wood, and something sour, clinging to the throat. Mark moved cautiously, weapon steady. Grace walked close at his side, clutching her rabbit, eyes darting at every shadow. Kaiser padded ahead, nose pressed low, movements sharp and deliberate. They passed crates stacked like sentries. Every creak echoed unnaturally. Grace's sneakers squeaked against the concrete, making her flinch. Then Kaiser froze. His head snapped toward a row of containers against the far wall. Rust streaked their sides, padlocks gleaming in the flicker of overhead light. He pulled hard, growling deep, then erupted into furious barks at one particular container. His claws screeched against the steel, smearing blood as he tore at the seam. Grace gasped. "Daddy! He knows!" Mark rattled the lock. Solid. The shepherd barked louder, slamming himself into the doors, frantic, desperate. Then a sound answered from inside. Faint, muffled, a whimper. Another. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. "Kids! There are kids in there!" Mark pressed his ear to the steel. Through Kaiser's howls, he heard it. Sobs, the rattle of small hands striking metal. He staggered back, chest tight. Dear God! Kaiser clawed until his pads bled, howling as if tearing the world open. Grace knelt, hugging him through her tears. "We hear you," she cried to the container. "We'll get you out." The cries inside sharpened, hope and terror mixing in a rising chorus. Mark's training screamed for backup, for warrants. But protocol had no place here. These weren't crates. They were prisons. Every second lost was another stolen from these children. He grabbed his radio. "This is Officer Jensen, East Warehouse Row. We have victims on site. Children inside a locked container. Send everything." Static crackled. Voices scrambled back. But he didn't wait. He turned to Grace. "Stay with Kaiser. Do not move." She nodded, gripping the shepherd's bloodied paws as if to anchor him. Mark raised his weapon, braced, exhaled, and fired. The gunshot thundered. The lock shattered, sparks flying. The doors groaned under the force. Kaiser lunged, shoving his body into the seam until it gave up. The smell hit first, stale sweat, fear, then the sight. Dozens of eyes blinked back from the dark. Children huddled together under filthy blankets, faces pale and streaked with tears. Some clutched broken toys, others clung to each other, their sobs filling the air like a broken choir. Grace's cry cracked. "Noah!" Her rabbit slipped from her arm onto the wet floor as she stumbled forward. Mark's throat closed. He had expected one child. Not this. Not a room full of lives hidden like cargo. Rage and grief twisted in his gut. Kaiser planted himself in the doorway, bloodied paws spread, chest heaving. His eyes blazed, daring the dark to touch the children again. Grace buried her face against his side, whispering, "You did it. You saved them." Mark's voice shook as he radioed again. "Dispatch. Confirm multiple victims. Send ambulances. All available units. Now." The children's cries swelled, but within them pulsed something new. Hope. Inside, silence held for a breath before small shapes stirred. Pale faces lifted, eyes wide, too hollow to believe rescue was real. Some flinched at the rain's patter, others shielded themselves as if another blow was coming. Grace gasped, spotting a thin boy curled in the corner. "Noah!" She ran before Mark could stop her, splashing into the container. Noah's hair clung to his forehead, his arms locked around his knees. At her voice, his eyes widened, light flickering after weeks of dark. She dropped to her knees, wrapping him in her arms. "You're here. I didn't leave you. I came back." His breath shuddered, weak against her ear. "I called. Your name." "I heard you," she whispered fiercely. "Kaiser did too. He brought me here." The shepherd padded forward, pressing his nose to Noah's knee, whining softly. Noah's cracked lips curved faintly. His trembling hand tangled in the dog's wet fur. "Good boy," he whispered. Mark stood frozen in the doorway, weapon lowered, chest tight. He had seen grief before, delivered death notices at doors, but never this. The raw reunion of children stolen, now returned to light. He crouched, voice low but steady. "You're safe now. We'll get you out." Some children recoiled, flinching against the walls. A girl buried her face in a torn bear. A boy whispered, "They'll come back." Mark pulled his badge, holding it to the light. "No one's going to hurt you again. You have my word." Grace lifted her head, her voice fierce. "It's true. This is my dad. He's a policeman. And Kaiser. He's the bravest dog in the world." Kaiser barked once, sharp, sealing her promise. Slowly, children began to stir. A boy uncurled his knees. Another shifted closer to the doorway. Hope flickered, fragile. Noah sagged against Grace. "We thought no one would come." Grace rocked him, whispering, "We found you. We'll get everyone out." Mark pressed his radio again. "Dispatch, multiple children alive. Immediate medical response needed. Bring everything." His voice cracked, but he forced it steady. "We're not losing them." Static answered, but he no longer cared. Grace cupped Noah's face in muddy hands, brushing his tears. "See? Forever means I don't leave. Not ever." He shook his head weakly, sobs breaking. "I thought forever was gone." "It's not," she whispered. "Not while we're together." Noah collapsed against her again, clutching tight. She held him, as if her small arms could shield him from every shadow. Kaiser pressed closer, curling around them, head resting on Noah's knee. His low growl rumbled, not at the children, but at the world outside that had dared to harm them. His bloodied paws dug into concrete, his body a living wall. Mark crouched beside them, his hand steady on Noah's thin shoulder. "You're safe now, son," he said softly, the word son slipping unbidden, heavy with meaning. "We're going to get you all out." Around them, whispers spread. "They found us. We're safe." Small voices, tentative, fragile, but alive. And at the heart of it all stood Kaiser, sentinel of the lost, his shadow stretching across steel walls like a promise carved in the dark. None of them would be left behind. For one fragile heartbeat, the warehouse held its breath. The container doors gaped open, spilling weak yellow light across trembling children, Grace clutching Noah, and Kaiser's bloodied paws as he stood guard. Hope had just cracked through the dark. Then came the boots, heavy, fast, angry. A door slammed at the far end, ricocheting like a gunshot. A tall man stormed in, coat snapping behind him, pistol gleaming in the flicker. His roar filled the space. "What the hell is this?" The children shrieked, scrambling back. Grace threw her arms tighter around Noah. Kaiser's head whipped toward the intruder, a growl tearing so deep it rattled the floor. Mark rose instantly, weapon up, and stood firm despite his pounding heart. "Police! Drop the weapon!" The man sneered, older than Mark expected, his face carved with cruelty. His pistol swept toward the container. "You don't know what you've walked into." "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Grace whimpered, clinging to Noah. He shook violently against her sleeve. Mark steadied, finger taut on the trigger. "I know exactly what I see. Children locked in cages. That's all I need to know." The trafficker laughed coldly. "You think you're a hero? One man, one dog, one girl, against an army you can't see. Walk away now, and maybe you live." Kaiser barked, lunging. Mark snapped a hand low. "Not yet, boy." The growl only deepened. "You don't get it," the man snarled. "These kids are property, merchandise. You just cost me a fortune." Grace's cry cut him like glass. "They're not things. They're people. They're my friends." The man's eyes flicked to her. Then he raised the gun toward the children. Mark roared, stepping forward, weapon locked on his chest. "Don't you dare!" "Last chance," the man spat. "Walk away, or watch them die." The air crackled, stretched razor-thin. Children whimpered. Grace whispered to Noah, "I won't let go." Kaiser crouched low, muscles coiled, eyes fixed. Mark's chest burned. There was no time left. "Then you'll have to go through me." The trafficker smirked, finger tightening on the trigger, and Kaiser moved. The shepherd exploded forward, 90 pounds of black fury slamming into him. The pistol fired once, the shot sparking against the ceiling. Then the man hit the ground with a roar. Grace screamed, clutching Noah. The children wailed. "Kaiser!" Mark shouted, but the dog was beyond recall. His jaws locked onto the man's arm, teeth sinking deep. The growl thundered through the warehouse, shaking steel and bone alike. The pistol clattered away, spinning across the floor. Mark surged forward, boot kicking the gun out of reach, weapon still trained. "Stay down." Pinned, the trafficker thrashed, cursing, but Kaiser dug claws into his chest, teeth clamped, every muscle vibrating with judgment. "Get him off me!" the man howled, arrogance gone, voice ragged. Mark loomed, gun inches from his face. "You threatened my daughter. You caged children. You don't get mercy." Grace held Noah tight, her tears streaming. She whispered into his hair, "He saved us. Kaiser saved us." Noah's thin fingers clutched her sweater, his rasping whisper, "Don't let him stop." Kaiser snarled again, shaking his head just enough to make the man scream. The sound filled every corner. Not just an animal's growl, but the roar of a guardian unleashed. Mark leaned close, voice like ice. "You're finished. And if you twitch, he finishes it." Fear flooded the man's eyes. "You don't know who I work for." "I don't care," Mark snapped. "All I care about are the kids you thought no one would come for." The children stared, wide-eyed. For the first time, they weren't shrinking from power. They were watching it fall. Finally, Mark barked the command, "Kaiser, hold!" The shepherd obeyed reluctantly, loosening his bite, but keeping the man pinned, teeth flashing inches from his throat. The growl rolled on, low and steady. Mark cuffed him fast, the metallic click ringing like a verdict. "You're done." The trafficker spat blood, muttering curses, but they were hollow now. Kaiser's head hovered near his throat, a snarl ready to snap. Mark rose, weapon still in hand, scanning the container. Dozens of children huddled, trembling, but alive. Grace clutched Noah, rocking him in fierce relief, and Kaiser stood between them and the dark, his shadow cast long across the steel walls. Then came sirens. At first faint, then swelling until blue and red lights seeped through rusted siding, painting the warehouse in fractured colors. "Daddy," Grace whispered, eyes wide with relief. "They're here." Boots thundered outside. Flashlights cut through the gloom as officers stormed in, weapons raised. "Jensen," one barked. "We got your call." "Holy God!" His voice faltered as the beams swept over the open container, revealing rows of small faces, wide and wet with tears. The sight stole his breath. Mark hauled the trafficker upright by the cuffs. The man spat curses, but Kaiser pressed close, growling constant. Officers rushed to take custody, but Mark's grip lingered on the chain, his eyes burning. He met the man's gaze, his words flat. "The dog made sure you'll never forget this night." The trafficker sneered, but the tremor in his eyes betrayed him. Kaiser released his hold, padding back to Grace and Noah. He pressed his nose against Grace's shoulder, then Noah's trembling hand, lowering himself as though still shielding them. Other officers spread blankets, coaxing the children with soft words. Their sobs eased into gasps, fragile relief stirring. Mark stood at the center, shoulders sagging, fury and grief burning together. The blue-red lights washed over him, each flash reminding him the nightmare was ending. Grace reached for him, her hand clutching his. He bent, pulling her close, his other hand steady on Noah's back. Kaiser leaned against them all, binding father, daughter, and friend into a circle of safety carved from chaos. For the first time that night, Mark let himself breathe. "It's over," he whispered into Grace's hair. "He can't hurt you anymore. Not any of you." The trafficker was dragged away in cuffs, his threats swallowed by sirens. The children's cries mingled with the hum of rescue. The steel walls that once hid despair now reflected the lights of justice. And at the center of it, Kaiser stood tall, his silhouette etched in blue and red. Salvation with fur, bleeding paws, and a will that refused to yield until every last child was safe. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and warm cotton, sterile comfort that could never erase the shadows carried in. The pediatric ward hummed with quiet urgency, the squeak of rubber soles, the rustle of gowns, the muted voices of nurses. Room after room held the rescued children. Small bodies lay beneath crisp white sheets, IV lines threading into thin arms, heart monitors beeping a fragile rhythm of survival. Doctors murmured words like malnutrition and trauma, their faces calm, but their eyes betraying them. In one of the middle beds lay Noah. His face was pale against the pillow, breaths shallow but steady. His hair was clean now, but the hollows beneath his eyes spoke of things no soap could wash away. Grace sat beside him, legs tucked beneath her, her stuffed rabbit perched on the bed's edge like a sentinel. She had refused to leave, even when nurses urged rest. "Not until he wakes up," she whispered. When Noah's eyelids finally fluttered open, she was the first thing he saw. "Grace." His voice was hoarse, but his lips curved faintly. Tears sprang instantly. "I'm here." "I told you I wouldn't leave." His thin fingers lifted, trembling against her sleeve. I thought forever was gone. Her hand covered his, steady. Forever just means we keep holding on, even when it's hard. At the foot of the bed, Kaiser lay curled on the floor, paws wrapped in gauze, coat brushed clean. His eyes carried the same weary fire. At Noah's voice, his ears pricked, and he pressed his nose gently to the boy's hand. Noah smiled weakly, tangling his fingers into the shepherd's fur. You didn't give up. Kaiser exhaled in a soft huff. Not a growl now, but a sigh of relief. He slid half beneath the bed, anchoring Noah with his presence. Grace bent close. You're safe now. We both are. Mark stood at the doorway, uniform damp, shoulders heavy. His gaze swept the ward. Rows of children wrapped in blankets, some sleeping, some staring hollow-eyed. Each one was someone's world, stolen and now returned. His fists clenched with rage at the evil that had scarred them. But when his eyes landed on Grace, her hand locked with Noah's, her head resting lightly on his pillow, something softer overtook the fire. She had kept her promise. She had never let go. He stepped forward, brushing her hair back with a calloused hand. He's going to be okay. Grace leaned into his touch, eyes never leaving Noah. Because we found him. Because Kaiser didn't stop. At the sound of his name, the shepherd lifted his head. Mark crouched, resting a hand on his shoulder. His voice was low, thick. You saved them all, boy. Kaiser blinked once, then lowered his head again, content at last to rest. The ward grew quiet. Nurses dimmed the lights. Rain tapped faintly at the windows, no longer threatening. Only a lullaby promising the storm was over. Grace curled against Noah's bed, her fingers locked with his. Before sleep took her, she whispered one last promise. Forever means never leaving. Not ever again. Hours passed. The pediatric ward slipped into a hushed rhythm, machines beeping gently, children breathing easier. For the first time in days, no locks barred their doors. Mark stood near the window, staring at the rain-slick streets below. Neon hospital light reflected in the glass, fractured by drops. He had been in countless hospitals before, but never as a father who had nearly missed the truth written in his daughter's eyes. Behind him, Grace sat by Noah's bed, her braid loosened, strands curling damp against her cheeks. The stuffed rabbit now lay tucked beneath Noah's blanket, as if belonging to them both. Kaiser sprawled at their feet, chest rising steadily, eyes half open, guarding even in rest. Mark turned, crouching beside his daughter. The dim light softened her face, but her eyes were shadowed by nights too heavy for her age. "Grace," he whispered. She looked up, fingers still tangled with Noah's. "Yes, Daddy." He hesitated, throat tight. He had faced killers with steadier breath than this. Finally, the words came. "I was wrong." Her brow furrowed. "Wrong? When I told you what you felt wasn't real, when I said you were too young, I dismissed you. I dismissed Noah, and I shouldn't have." His voice cracked. "Love, no matter how small, is real to the ones who feel it, and I forgot that." Her lip trembled. "But you came. You believed me when it mattered." Mark brushed her hair gently. "Not soon enough. You carried the truth when I couldn't see it. Because of you, Noah is alive tonight. They all are." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She leaned into him, voice muffled. "I just didn't want to lose him. He's my best friend. He's everything. Mark closed his eyes, arms wrapping around her small frame. And that matters, he whispered fiercely. You were braver than I was, Grace. Braver than most men I've known. She pulled back, eyes shining. Do you really mean that? He nodded, his own eyes glassy. I thought my badge made me the one who knew right from wrong, but tonight, it was you. You and that dog. His gaze flicked down. Kaiser lifted his head briefly, tail thumping once against the floor. Grace smiled faintly through her tears, stroking his fur. He always knew. Mark placed his hand over hers. I'm proud of you. More than I can ever say. Her grip tightened. Promise you won't forget. That love matters, even when it's small. His throat constricted. I promise. Never again. From the bed, a faint voice threaded into the quiet. Grace? She turned instantly, smoothing Noah's hair. I'm here, she whispered. He blinked slowly, lips curving. I thought you'd be gone when I woke up. Never, she said, steady now. Forever means never leaving. Mark's chest ached as he watched them. Two children clutching each other, as if the world depended on it. He had nearly silenced that truth, nearly crushed it under doubt. But love wasn't measured by years or sanctioned by adults. It lived in small hands, gripping through the dark. It fought through rain and fear and steel doors. And sometimes, it was the very thing that saved lives. By midnight, the corridors were nearly silent. The glow of fluorescence cast long shadows across pale walls. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. In room 312, Grace slept curled beside her rabbit. Noah murmured softly, restless but alive. At the foot of the bed, Kaiser lay stretched out, paws still bandaged, eyes unblinking. His ears twitched at every sound. A blanket rustling, a nurse's step. Even in calm, he stood sentinel between the children and the night. Grace stirred in her sleep, brow furrowing. Kaiser's head lifted instantly, a low growl rumbling, protective, not threatening. She settled again, sensing him near. His gaze met hers briefly, a silent promise. I am here. Nothing touches you. Mark watched from the chair near the window, exhaustion heavy. He had seen men break in firefights with less weight than this dog carried without complaint. He leaned forward, whispering into the dimness. It's more than instinct. It's love. That's what keeps them safe when we can't. Kaiser's muscles rippled beneath his coat as he shifted, ears tracking the faint hum of machines. The world had tested these children cruelly, but here was a guardian who refused to let the night undo them. Mark rose, crouching beside him. His hand brushed the shepherd's head. Good boy, he whispered, voice thick. They're safe, thanks to you. Kaiser blinked once, but his gaze stayed fixed on the shadows. He would not falter. Outside, the city slept beneath sheets of rain, unaware of the sanctuary carved into room 312. Inside, the vigil held steady, a father's regret, a daughter's promise, and a dog's unyielding watch. And as the night stretched on, one truth remained unshaken. Salvation hadn't come from a badge or a gun alone. It had come with fur, with bloodied paws, with loyalty that refused to yield until every child was safe. The sun hung low, spilling gold across Oak Ridge's fields. The oak tree stood as it always had, sturdy, sprawling, patient, its branches reaching skyward as though in quiet defiance of time. Weeks had passed since the storm of fear, the nights of warehouses and sirens, and the hospital corridors heavy with antiseptic. The world felt softer now, though marked by scars. Beneath the oak, Grace and Noah sat shoulder to shoulder, silence stretched between them. Words felt too fragile, so their closeness spoke instead. Grace held her worn rabbit against her chest. Noah traced lines in the dirt with his sneaker, fingers trembling until they finally brushed hers. He stiffened, then relaxed, letting his hand rest in hers. Tentative, fragile, but real. "The oak looks the same," Noah said quietly. Grace nodded. "But we've changed." And they had. Fear had carved shadows into their childhood, yet here, with sunlight threading through the leaves and Kaiser stretched at their feet, they discovered something stronger than fear. The shepherd rested with his head on Grace's lap, paws still bandaged, eyes half closed, but alert. Every twitch of his ears was reassurance. The dark had been endured, but it would never again own them. Grace stroked his fur. "He never stopped," she whispered. Noah leaned into her shoulder. "Neither did you." A few days later, the town gathered. Oak Ridge Square filled with families, flags fluttering gently above brick storefronts, children's laughter tempered by reverence. At the center, a stage draped in blue and gold held a single plaque. In honor of Kaiser, a hero of Oak Ridge. Grace and Noah arrived hand in hand, walking beside Mark and Kaiser. Whispers rippled as the shepherd passed, chest broad, stride steady, his heroism wordless. Children had painted a banner strung along the fence, bright paw prints in reds, blues, and yellows. Grace pointed to one smudged oval. "That's mine." Noah smiled. "Mine's right beside yours." Their hands brushed again as they stepped back, pride softening the shadows still etched in their faces. The mayor's voice carried across the square, warm but firm. She spoke of courage, of children who had survived, of a town united by loyalty and love. She named Kaiser as more than a dog, as the one who led them into the dark and brought them out again. Applause swelled, not wild or raucous, but steady, reverent. The children approached, timid at first, then bolder, reaching to stroke Kaiser's fur. He accepted their touch without fuss, calm, unshaken. His heroism required no performance. Grace and Noah knelt beside him. Kaiser's eyes locked on theirs, steady, amber, unblinking. The look said everything. "You are safe. You are not forgotten." Grace hugged his neck. Noah laid a hand on his shoulder. Around them, the crowd fell silent, giving the moment to them alone. Mark read the certificate aloud, voice thick. "In recognition of bravery, loyalty, and unwavering service." His hand lingered on Kaiser's head. "You saved lives, boy. All of ours." Kaiser's tail wagged once, modest, final. The crowd exhaled as one. That evening, when the ceremony was over and the town quieted, Noah and Grace returned to the oak. The amber sky draped them in warmth, the air sweet with pine and earth. They sat close, shoulders brushing, hands intertwining without hesitation now. "Forever doesn't mean easy," Grace whispered into the gathering dusk. "It just means never leaving each other behind." Noah nodded, his voice soft but sure. "We're not just surviving anymore. We're together." Kaiser shifted, resting his head across both their knees, as if sealing their vow with his weight. His breath was steady, his eyes vigilant, his body the boundary between them and the world. They leaned back against the oak, faces lifted to the last light of day. Shadows stretched, then softened, and the leaves whispered overhead. The horrors they had endured would never fully leave them, but neither would the bond that had carried them through. Grace squeezed Noah's hand. "Forever," she said again. "Forever," he echoed. The first stars pricked the twilight. Kaiser lifted his head once, sniffed the cool air, then curled closer around them, sentinel and companion both. Mark watched from a short distance, his heart heavy and full all at once. He had nearly missed the truth written in his daughter's eyes, nearly silencing what she had fought so fiercely to defend. Now, standing beneath the oak, he understood. Love, even in the smallest hands, even whispered between children, could be braver than any badge, sharper than any command. The oak tree held them, the town honored them, and Kaiser guarded them. And in the golden twilight, Grace and Noah rose not as victims of fear, but as young souls who had found courage, loyalty, and love strong enough to withstand even the deepest night. With Kaiser at their side, they knew one thing with unshakable certainty. Whatever lay ahead, they would never walk it alone. Sitting quietly, watching a German shepherd rest its head on the lap of someone it trusts, it's easy to see why these dogs touch our hearts so profoundly. Their loyalty isn't just about protection or obedience. It's about presence, about showing up day after day, silently offering comfort, courage, and unwavering companionship. The bond we share with them goes beyond simple affection. It's a connection that teaches patience, empathy, and the quiet power of being there for someone without expecting anything in return. Watching Kaiser beside Noah and Grace, it's clear that these moments are more than heroics. They're reminders of the depth of trust a dog can hold for us, and the love we can mirror back to them. It's a relationship that shapes who we are, softening the edges of our lives and grounding us in ways words often can't capture. If you've ever wondered how to deepen that connection with your own dog, there are gentle, thoughtful ways to do so. Practices that go beyond commands and tricks, helping you truly understand each other. Take a look at a resource like this when you have a quiet moment. It's worth exploring for the love, loyalty, and joy your dog brings every single day.